Part 1-3 Petra. The city carved to last and lost to time, the Nabutian civilization. Some cities are built to rise. Petra was built to remain. I walked the sick at dawn, a narrow canyon winding through sandstone cliffs, where each step echoed between walls, tinted pink, gold, and blood. As the sun rose, light slowly spilled between the rocks, and then, suddenly, there it was, the treasury, not a building, a sculpture carved into the mountain itself. Columns, statues, pediments, all shaped not with bricks or mortar, but with chisels and belief. It took my breath away. Petra was the capital of the Nabutian civilization, a kingdom that thrived in the harsh deserts of modern-day Jordan from around the 4th century BCE to the 2nd century CE. They were not an empire of swords. They were masters of water and trade. The Nabataeans knew how to turn desert into life. They built cisterns, aqueducts, hidden channels carved into stone to collect rainwater. In a place where rivers do not flow, they stored enough water to sustain tens of thousands and even grow lush gardens, and they grew rich. Why? Because Petra sat at the crossroads of incense routes connecting Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Every caravan passed through, and Petra thrived. But Petra was more than a trading post, it was a statement of resilience. Look closely at its facades, the Hellenistic columns, the Egyptian motifs, the Babylonian influences, a mosaic of cultures, absorbed and reborn through Nabatean hands. They didn't conquer, they adapted, and they left behind a city that spoke not of power, but of coexistence. So what happened? How could a city so strong, so wise in water and trade, fall? The answer, once again, is time. Trade routes shifted. The Roman Empire absorbed Nabatea. The world moved on. Then came earthquakes, silting of water channels, decline. By the time of the Islamic Caliphates, Petra was a whisper, and for nearly 1,000 years, it disappeared from the maps. When Western explorers rediscovered Petra in the 1800s, they were stunned. A city in stone, a forgotten people, a masterpiece left out in the open, and yet completely hidden. I remember standing before it, watching shadows crawl across its face as the sun moved, and realizing that Petra never tried to rise above nature. It carved itself into nature, and perhaps that's why it survived. The Nabateans taught us something rare, that endurance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's carved quietly into stone. Now follow me. We leave the deserts of Arabia and turn east, to a valley once fertile and majestic, now dry and broken. A land once known as the cradle of bronze and ritual. The Indus Valley Civilization. Part 14. The civilization without a voice. The Indus Valley Civilization. They left no names, no wars, no temples, only the whisper of order and the silence of dust. There are places in history that make noise. Empires of swords, of gold, of gods. But the Indus Valley is not one of them. It is not a story of kings. It is a story of cities. I stood among the ruins of Mohenjo-daro in present-day Pakistan. A grid of streets, brick by brick, eerily precise. No towering statues, no grand palaces, no inscriptions of conquest, and yet, a sense of quiet intelligence fills the air. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Harappan Civilization, flourished between 2600 BCE and 1900 BCE across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. They've built cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dholavira, and they built them with remarkable planning. Streets that aligned with the stars, multi-level drainage systems, standardized bricks and weights, public baths and granaries. In a time when most of the world was still tribal, the Indus had sanitation. They may not have had emperors, but they had engineers. And the greatest mystery, their script, carved onto seals, painted on pottery. The Indus script remains under thousands of symbols, no Rosetta Stone, no known translation. So we don't know what they call themselves, we don't know their gods, we don't know their songs. Only their systems, their choices, their symmetry. So what happened? Around 1900 BCE, the cities began to empty, trade slowed, crafts declined, streets fell silent. Why? Perhaps climate shifted, the monsoon failed, the Great Saraswati River dried, or perhaps the political balance collapsed. A slow unraveling of the system, not through fire, but through silence. No one conquered them, they simply stopped. I remember standing by the great bath in Mohenjo-daro, the water long gone, but the structure intact. built 4,000 years ago with waterproof bricks. It's still watertight, and I thought, they didn't build monuments for gods. They built systems for people. The Indus did not leave legends. They left questions, and maybe that's a form of wisdom too. Now, let's move forward to a land of mountains and horsemen, of fire temples and eternal struggle. Persia, the empire of light and shadow. Part 15. Persia, the fire that burned without tyranny, the Achaemenid Empire, to rule not by fear. That was the Persian promise. I walked through the ruins of Persepolis, stone lions guarding empty stairways, inscriptions carved in cuneiform along walls scorched by time and conquest. This was no savage empire. This was vision made stone. Persia began not with conquest, but with a proclamation. When Cyrus the Great rose in the 6th century BCE, he did not slaughter his way to power. He offered a new idea, an empire built on tolerance. When he conquered Babylon, he did not burn their temples. He restored them. He let exiles return home. He allowed subject peoples to keep their gods, their languages, their customs. And on a clay cylinder now, kept in the British Museum, he wrote, "I will not rule as a tyrant. I will respect the traditions of the lands I govern." It was a first draft of human rights to 2,500 years before we coined the term. Under Darius, Persia became a true engine of civilization. Roads stretched for thousands of miles. Postal systems relayed messages in days. A standardized coinage united the economy. Satrapies managed with local autonomy. This was no dictatorship. This was governance scaled up. Persia's strength was not in forcing unity, but in managing diversity. And, at its heart, was flame, the sacred fire of Zoroastrianism, tended day and night, representing order against chaos, truth against lies. Zoroaster taught that life is a moral battlefield, that every human has the power to choose light, and the Achaemenids believed, to govern justly is to align with that cosmic struggle. But even empires of light cast shadows. Eventually, decadence crept in. Court intrigues tangled governance, revolts stirred, and then, from the west, came a whirlwind. Alexander the Great. He didn't just defeat Persia, he claimed it, wore Persian dress, married a Persian wife, declared himself heir to Cyrus, and, in doing so, he both ended and extended the Persian dream. I stood at the gate of all nations, where stone bulls still flanked the entrance. Wind moved across the flat plains of Fars, and I imagined the messengers, the kings, the governors who once passed through, not as conquerors, but as stewards of something greater than themselves. The Persians taught us this. Empire does not have to mean oppression. Power can serve principle. Now come to a land of blood and banners, of emperors and rebellion, to the Yellow River, the mandate of heaven, and the walls that touch the sky. Ancient China, the dynasty that burned to unite. Part 16. China. The dragon that burned to unite. From Shang to Qin order must be forged. Unity must be paid in fire. I stood on a remote stretch of the Great War, not the tourist sections, but the broken spine of stones winding through the hills, like the bones of a sleeping dragon. It didn't feel like a monument, it felt like a scar, a memory of when China tried and bled to become one. The story of ancient China begins in fragments. The Shang dynasty rose around 1600 BCE, ruling the Yellow River Valley. Their world was one of bronze and bones. Oracle bones burned to predict the will of heaven, inscribed with the earliest Chinese writing. Then came the Zhou, who introduced the idea that would shape China forever, the mandate of heaven, the belief that rulers reign not by birthright, but by virtue, and that heaven can revoke its favor through flood, famine, or rebellion. This wasn't just political, it was moral, but unity was elusive. For centuries, China broke into warring states. Dozens of kingdoms fought, schemed, and allied in endless games of survival. Then, from the western frontier, came a king named Ying Zhen. He conquered them all. By 221 BCE, he declared himself Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of China. He standardized writing, weights, measures, and laws. He crushed dissent, burned books, buried scholars. He built roads, canals, and the foundations of the Great War. He did not rule kindly, but he forged a nation. And like fire hardens metal, his brutality created unity. At a cost. I remember walking through the terracotta army, thousands of clay soldiers, each with a unique face, frozen in eternal formation. They were not just guardians of a tomb, they were a statement. This emperor would command even in death, but after his death, rebellion erupted. The Qin dynasty fell after just 15 years. His tomb remains unopened, rumored to contain rivers of mercury, a warning, a legacy, a mystery. Yet what a unified never came apart again. The idea of one China, forged in war, shaped by law, preserved through dynasties' lives. When China did not conquer the world, it became a world. Now, follow me eastward, across the sea, to an island where emperors became gods, where paper and sword danced together in ceremony. Ancient Japan, where silence holds power. Part 17, Japan, the empire of silence and shadow from Jomon to Yamato, where others built with conquest. Japan built with continuity. When I first stepped into the moss-laden paths of Nara, I didn't hear the sound of history. I heard its absence. Stone lanterns stood quietly in the undergrowth. Shrines slept beneath ancient cedar trees. There was no roar of empire here, only breath, only presence. Japan's ancient history unfolds, not in bursts, but in layers. The Jomon period, beginning around 14,000 BCE, gave rise to the world's oldest known potteries. Spiraled clay, rough but elegant, these were not empire builders. They were gatherers, fishermen, and ritualists, who wove their lives into the land like roots into forest floor. Then came the Yayoi, bringing rice, metal, and new forms of hierarchy from the Korean peninsula. And eventually, by the 3rd century CE, a unifying clan emerged. The Yamato didn't conquer Japan with swords. They conquered with lineage. Claiming descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess, they merged divine myth with earthly rule. And from that union came something rare in human history, a dynasty that never broke. The Japanese imperial line still existing today. No revolutions, no resets, only continuity. At the heart of this identity was Shinto, the way of the gods, not a religion of commandments, but of presence. Kami in rivers, in wind, in the fox's eye. Purity through ritual, power through harmony. And unlike the empires we've seen before, ancient Japan did not build grand cities or road networks to dominate. It built a spiritual architecture, a world where silence, gesture, and season could govern as surely as law. But Japan was never isolated. From China came writing, from Korea, Buddhism, and from the steppes, whispers of warrior codes. And by the 7th century, Japan began to write its myths in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, blending fact and story until they could no longer be separated. I remember standing beneath the torii gate of Ai's grand shrine. No nails used in its construction, rebuilt every 20 years, an exact precision, to destroy and rebuild, not as loss, but as renewal. It's a lesson Japan still teaches the world. Where other civilizations shouted, Japan listened. Where others collapsed, Japan changed form. And that is its greatest strength. Now, let us travel south, to a kingdom in the jungle of towers reaching sky, and stories carved in stone. Angkor, the city where gods walked among men. Part 18 Angkor, the stone that remembered the sky. The Khmer Empire they built, not to touch the heavens, but to reflect them. When I first saw Angkor Wat, it was before sunrise. Mist curled along the moat. The silhouette of 5 towers emerged like lotus buds against a fading night. And for a moment, I forgot this was ruin. It looked eternal. The Khmer Empire, centered in modern-day Cambodia, rose around the 9th century CE and lasted for over 600 years. At its height, it was one of the largest and most sophisticated civilizations in the world. With a capital, Angkor, that held up to 1 million people. They've built not just temples, but entire hydraulic cities, vast reservoirs that caught monsoon rains, canals and moats that irrigated rice fields, precision alignments with the stars. Angkor wasn't just architecture, it was cosmology made physical. At the heart stood Angkor Wat, the world's largest religious monument, dedicated to Vishnu, later to Buddha. But it was more than a temple, it was a map of the universe. Its 5 towers mirrored Mount Meru, home of the gods. Its galleries told the epitaphes of Ramayana and Mahabharata, carved in stone. Its symmetry spoke of divine order. To walk through Angkor is not to move through space, but through myth. Yet empires, no matter how divine, are fragile. By the 15th century, Angkor was abandoned. Why? Perhaps invasions, perhaps the very systems that made it strong. The water, the stone, the centralized faith became unsustainable. Rain changed, fields dried, the jungle crept back, and silence fell where prayers once echoed. But Angkor never disappeared. Monks still kept vigil at Ta Prohm. Villagers still prayed at its gates. And when the French stumbled upon it centuries later, the jungle had not destroyed it. It had preserved it, wrapped it in roots and time, like a memory held in a dream. I remember touching the wall of Bayan, where hundreds of serene stone faces smiled down at me. Not proud, not mournful, just eternal. The Khmer did not just build a city, they built a cosmic mirror, where gods could descend, and humans could rise. And though the jungle won the surface, the stone remembers. Next, follow me across the sea once more, to a world of feathers, obsidian, and blood. 2-stepped pyramids and solar calendars, Mesoamerica, where time was a god, and sacrifice was language. Part 19, Mesoamerica, where time had teeth. Maya and Aztec civilizations. They did not fear time, they worshipped it. They fed it. I stood at the base of the Pyramid of the Sun in The sun was blazing overhead, and I imagined, centuries ago, a priest climbing these steep steps, heart pounding, obsidian knife in hand. Not in cruelty, but in offering. Here, sacrifice was not destruction. It was balance. Mesoamerica, a land stretching from central Mexico through Guatemala and Belize, birthed some of the most mathematically and cosmologically advanced civilizations on Earth. The mother culture carved colossal heads and began the sacred Bolgate. The Maya masters of time created calendars so precise they could predict solar eclipses to the day. And the Aztecs, fierce and sophisticated, built Tenochtitlan, a floating city of canals and temples that stunned the Spaniards. To understand them, you must abandon Western time, for the Maya time was not linear. It cycled. Every event echoed a past one, every number was sacred, every day had a personality. Their long count calendar didn't count down to the end. It marked the turning of worlds. And when 2012 came and went, and the world did not end, the Maya smiled. Because for them, it had restarted. Ritual defined life. Blood, especially royal blood, was the bridge between humans and gods. It was not cruelty. To maintain the order of the cosmos, the gods had to be nourished. With heart, with song, with sacrifice. The Aztecs believed the sun god Huitzilopochtli needed strength to rise each day, so they offered hearts on the top of Templo Maya, not with malice, but reverence. They were feeding the machine of time. To them, the worst fate was not death, but for the sun to stop rising. And yet, in their stone carvings and codices, you find not horror, glyphs flowing like rivers, stories of maize gods and celestial twins, mathematics, medicine, and myth intertwined. They saw no contradiction between science and faith. Both were sacred. I stood atop a stepped pyramid in Palenque looking out at jungle-cloaked mountains, and I understood these people were not obsessed with death. They were obsessed with continuity. And in a world ruled by time, what greater ambition is there than to become part of it? Now let us sail down the spine of the Indus, to a land without wheels or riding, but with roads that climb clouds. To an empire stitched together by runners and sunbeams. The Inca, the empire of stone and sky. Part 20, Mesopotamia. The land that dreamed in clay Sumer, Akkad, Babylon. In the beginning, there was mud, and in the mud, they wrote eternity. I held a fragment of clay once, cracked, sun-hardened, barely the size of a hand. Upon it, lines and wedges, etched by a reed stylus 4,000 years ago. It was a receipt, but it was also a miracle. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, is where history began. Not metaphorically, literally. The Sumerians, by 3000 BCE, built the world's first cities Eridu. They invented writing cuneiform, not to compose poetry, but to count grain. From accounting came literature. From storage came story. They built ziggurats, terraced temples climbing to the sky. They divided the hour into 60 minutes. They dreamed of immortality in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving tale of a man's sorrow, pride, and search for meaning. Then came Akkad, the first true empire. Under Sargon, the Great, uniting dozens of city-states under one banner. He ruled not with stone walls, but with language, spreading Akkadian like a web across lands and tongues. Power flowed not only through swords, but through script. Then came Babylon, the city of hanging gardens and Hammurabi's code. Inscribed on stone, it was the first known attempt at universal justice. An eye for an eye, yes, but also protection for the weak, the orphan, the widow. Here, law became more than command. It became culture. But Mesopotamia, like its rivers, was never still. Floods came, droughts came, invaders came, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Persians, each building on the bones of the last. Cities rose. Cities burned. But always, someone picked up the stylus again. What strikes me most is not how mighty they were, it's how intimate their world feels. Letters from lovers, songs to the moon god, complaints about lazy sons. They dreamed big, of kings and gods. But they wrote small. And because they wrote, we remember. I've touched a receipt from 2000 BCE, you can too. That's the power of clay, breaks easily, but it endures. Now, let us rise from the valley and travel west, to a city of marble, reason, and defiant democracy. Athens, the fire that dared to think.